The sun blazed mercilessly over Copper Ridge as Samuel Hayes stepped out of Morrison's general store, his weathered hands gripping supplies for another lonely week on his ranch. The dusty main street stretched before him like a scar across the desert, lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean away from each other in mutual distrust. But today, something was different. A crowd had gathered near the town well, their voices rising in angry whispers. Men clutched rifles, women pulled children close, and at the center of it all lay a figure that would change everything. A bleeding Navajo warrior, alone and dying under the unforgiving Arizona sky. What happens when a single act of compassion collides with a town's deepest fears? When choosing humanity over hatred could cost everything you've built? Stay with us as we uncover how one rancher's decision at a dusty well set in motion events that no one, not the townspeople, not the tribe, not even Samuel Hayes himself, could have imagined. This is a story where the smallest gesture creates the biggest change. Samuel Hayes had seen dying men before, but something about the warrior collapse beside Copper Ridge's well struck him differently. The Navajo man couldn't have been more than 25, his chest rising and falling in desperate, shallow breaths. Blood seeped from a gunshot wound in his shoulder, staining the red dirt beneath him. "Don't you dare go near that savage, Hayes," Sheriff Morrison's voice cracked like a whip across the gathered crowd. 15 townspeople had formed a semicircle around the well, rifles and shotguns pointed at the wounded man. Their faces were masks of fear and rage, eyes darting between the Navajo and the distant mesas where smoke signals had been spotted that morning. Samuel's weathered hands tightened around his supply bundle. At 53, he'd spent most of his life avoiding the town's politics and prejudices, content to work his small ranch in the shadow of the red rocks. But looking at the dying warrior, he saw something that cut through years of carefully maintained neutrality. He saw his own son, Thomas, who died of fever 3 winters ago at about the same age. "He's bleeding out," Samuel said quietly, taking a step forward. "Man's got a right to water." "That man is one of them that killed the Patterson family last month," Mrs. Garrett shrieked, clutching her young daughter. "He's probably scouting for more raids." The warrior's eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. His lips moved soundlessly, and Samuel caught the word that might have been water in broken English. The sight of those pleading eyes decided something deep in Samuel's chest. "Stand down, Hayes." Sheriff Morrison's rifle swung toward him. "I won't have you compromising this town's safety for some misguided Christian charity." Samuel looked around the circle of hostile faces, people he'd known for 15 years, who'd bought his cattle and shared his table. But today they looked like strangers, their humanity buried beneath layers of fear and hatred. He thought of Thomas again, of how they'd begged for water during those final fevered hours. "I'm getting that man some water," Samuel announced, his voice carrying across the silent street. "Anyone wants to stop me can try." The crowd murmured angrily, but Samuel was known as a fair man with a quick draw. More importantly, he was one of the few ranchers who still employed former Confederate soldiers alongside freed slaves, treating all his hands with equal respect. His moral authority carried weight, even when it conflicted with popular opinion. He knelt beside the warrior, ignoring the rifles still trained on them both. Up close, he could see the man was young, barely more than a boy, really. A silver pendant hung around his neck, some kind of animal, maybe a wolf. Samuel uncapped his canteen and carefully lifted the warrior's head. "Easy now," he murmured, letting water trickle between the dry lips. "You're safe." The warrior's eyes focused on Samuel's face with startling intensity. When he spoke, his English was clearer than expected. "Running Wolf, my name. Running Wolf. Samuel Hayes. You're hurt bad, son. Bullet went clean through, but you've lost a lot of blood." Running Wolf gripped Samuel's wrist with surprising strength. Why help enemy?" Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Don't see no enemy here. Just see a hurt young man who needs help." The crowd watched in tense silence as Samuel tore strips from his own shirt to bandage the wound. Mrs. Garrett whispered urgent prayers, while her husband muttered about Indian sympathizers. But Samuel worked with gentle efficiency, his movements sure and practiced from years of doctoring sick cattle and injured ranch hands. "This is madness, Hayes," Sheriff Morrison shouted. "You're aiding and abetting a hostile." "I'm helping a human being," Samuel replied without looking up. "Something I thought we all learned to do in Sunday school." Running Wolf's breathing had steadied, and some color returned to his bronze skin. As Samuel finished the bandaging, the warrior reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out a small carved stone, a wolf matching his pendant. For kindness, Running Wolf whispered, pressing it into Samuel's palm. My people, they will know. Before Samuel could respond, Running Wolf had somehow found the strength to stand. Swaying slightly, he looked around the circle of hostile faces, then back at Samuel. Without another word, he began walking toward the desert, each step steady despite his wound. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he disappeared into the shimmering heat haze. Only then did Samuel notice the carved wolf stone still warm in his palm and wonder what exactly Running Wolf had meant about his people knowing. By evening, news of Samuel's defiance had spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire through dry grass. The Copper Ridge saloon buzzed with angry voices and clinking whiskey glasses as men who'd never agreed on anything found common ground in their outrage. Hayes has lost his mind, growled Jake Patterson, brother to the family killed in last month's raid. His massive fists clenched around his beer mug, giving aid and comfort to the same savages who butchered my kin. Sheriff Morrison nodded grimly from behind the bar. Mark my words, gentlemen. That Indian will be back with his whole tribe. Hayes might as well have drawn them a map to our doorstep. The saloon's batwing doors swung open, and Samuel entered to a wall of hostile silence. Every conversation stopped. 20 pairs of eyes tracked his movement to the bar, where Morrison reluctantly poured him his usual whiskey. Quite a day you've had, Samuel, Morrison said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Hope you're satisfied with yourself. Samuel sipped his drink, feeling the weight of collective judgment. These men had been his neighbors for 15 years, but tonight they looked at him like a traitor. Man was dying, couldn't just watch. Could have and should have, Jake Patterson snarled, standing up so fast his chair toppled. That man you helped probably has my brother's blood on his hands. You don't know that, don't I? Patterson's voice rose to a shout. They're all the same. Killers and thieves who'd slit your throat for a copper penny. Samuel set down his glass with deliberate calm. Running Wolf was hurt bad, alone, scared, looked more like someone's son than a killer. The mention of the warrior's name sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Somehow, having a name made the enemy more real, more human. It was easier to hate a faceless savage than a wounded young man called Running Wolf. You gave him water and medical aid, Sheriff Morrison continued. That makes you an accomplice to whatever he and his people do next. Outside, thunder rumbled across the desert, though no rain would come. The sound made several men glance nervously toward the windows. Indian attacks often came during storms, when the noise masked approaching hoofbeats. Samuel finished his whiskey and stood. I did what my conscience told me was right. If that makes me an outcast in this town, so be it. He headed for the door, but Patterson blocked his path. The big man reeked of whiskey and unwashed sweat, his eyes bloodshot with grief and rage. My brother's widow is scared to sleep at night, Patterson hissed. His children wake up screaming from nightmares, and you're worried about your conscience? I'm sorry for your loss, Jake, truly, but punishing one innocent man won't bring your family back. Innocent? Patterson's laugh was bitter as desert wind. There ain't no innocent Indians, Hayes. The sooner you learn that, the longer you'll live. Samuel pushed past him and stepped into the night air. The carved wolfstone felt heavy in his pocket, a reminder of something he couldn't quite name. As he walked toward his horse, he noticed light flickering in windows throughout the town, candles and lanterns burning late as families huddled together, fear keeping them awake. Mrs. Garrett stood in her doorway, silhouetted against the warm glow of her kitchen. When she saw Samuel, she quickly closed the door and turned the lock. The sound echoed down the empty street like a gunshot. At the livery stable, old Pete Miller was loading his shotgun while his teenage son watched with wide eyes. Evening, Pete, Samuel said quietly. Miller looked up, his weathered face hard as stone. Samuel, heard what you did today. News travels fast. Too fast for some folks' comfort. Miller snapped the shotgun closed. My advice? Get yourself out to your ranch and stay there for a while. Let tempers cool down. That bad? Worse, Patterson's talking about forming a militia. Says if the law won't protect decent folks from Indian sympathizers, decent folks will have to protect themselves. Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. He'd seen what frontier justice looked like when fear overruled reason. Good men became monsters when they convinced themselves they were protecting their families. "Pete, you've known me 15 years. You really think I'd endanger this town?" The old man's expression softened slightly. "No, Samuel, I don't. But I also don't think you understand what you've set in motion. That Indian you helped, his people will come looking for him. And when they do, there's going to be blood." As Samuel rode out toward his ranch under a sky heavy with unshed rain, he couldn't shake the feeling that Pete was right. The carved wolf stone seemed to burn against his leg, a token of gratitude that might become a harbinger of war. Samuel woke before sunrise to the sound of his horses whinnying nervously in the corral. Something had spooked them during the night. He pulled on his boots and grabbed his rifle, stepping onto the porch of his modest ranch house as the first pale light crept over the red mesas. What he saw in his front yard stopped him cold. Arranged in perfect formation were dozens of horses, painted ponies bearing riders in traditional Navajo dress, their faces painted for war. But they sat motionless as statues, weapons lowered, waiting. At their head rode a man Samuel recognized as Chief Red Sky, the most respected leader of the local Navajo bands. And beside him, sitting straight and proud despite his bandaged shoulder, was Running Wolf. Samuel's hands tightened on his rifle, though he didn't raise it. His nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. If these warriors meant harm, he was already dead. Red Sky urged his horse forward, stopping 20 feet from the porch. When he spoke, his English was formal and precise, learned from missionary schools years ago. "Samuel Hayes, you are the one who saved my nephew's life." Nephew. The word hit Samuel like a physical blow. Running Wolf wasn't just any warrior, he was family to the most powerful chief in the territory. "I gave him water and bandaged his wound," Samuel said carefully. "Nothing more. Nothing more." Red Sky's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "My nephew tells me your people stood with guns pointed at him, ready to watch him die like a dog in the dirt. But you risked your life to show kindness to a stranger." Behind the chief, 40 warriors sat their horses in perfect silence. Samuel could see rifles and traditional weapons, war paint and eagle feathers. This was a raiding party large enough to destroy Copper Ridge in a single morning. "Where I come from," Samuel said, "we help folks who need helping." Running Wolf spoke to his uncle in rapid Navajo, gesturing toward Samuel. The chief listened, then nodded gravely. "My nephew says you called him son," Red Sky continued. "This is not a word your people use for mine. He reminded me of my boy. Lost him 3 years back to the fever." Something shifted in Red Sky's expression, a recognition of shared grief that transcended racial boundaries. "I too have lost a son, to soldiers' bullets." The two men regarded each other across the yard, each measuring the other's pain and finding it familiar. Around them, the desert held its breath as the sun climbed higher. "Chief," Samuel said slowly, "I appreciate you coming to thank me. But if your people ride into Copper Ridge, there's going to be bloodshed. The town's already scared out of its mind." Red Sky's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. "Who says we ride to make war?" Before Samuel could respond, the chief raised his hand. As one, the 40 warriors behind him reached into leather pouches and pulled out items that gleamed in the morning light. Not weapons, gifts, blankets, jewelry, carved figures, painted pottery. "In our tradition," Red Sky explained, "when someone saves a life, the debt can only be repaid with life. You gave my nephew water when your people would have watched him die. Now we give your people something more precious than water." Samuel stared at the gifts, understanding slowly dawning. "You're going to Copper Ridge. We are going to show your people that the Navajo remember kindness, and that one man's courage can change the hearts of many. Chief, they'll think it's an attack. Half the town's probably already loading their weapons." Red Sky's smile was knowing. "Let them load their weapons. We come in peace, but we do not come defenseless. Sometimes fear must see strength before it can recognize mercy." Running Wolf rode forward, still moving carefully because of his wound. He pulled out a beautiful silver pendant, a wolf like the one he wore, but larger and more ornate. "For your lost son," he said simply, offering it to Samuel. "So his spirit knows he is remembered by people who never met him, but honor his father's heart." Samuel's throat tightened as he accepted the pendant. The metal was warm and smooth, clearly a treasured family piece. "Running Wolf, I can't take something this valuable." "You already have," the young warrior replied. "You took a dying enemy into your protection. This is nothing compared to that gift." Red Sky gathered his reins. "We ride to your town now, Samuel Hayes. Will you come with us? Your presence might help your people understand that we come as friends, not enemies." Samuel looked at the 40 warriors, then at the pendant weighing heavy in his palm. His choice yesterday had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped, only guided. The town would see the war party coming and assume the worst. But maybe, with his help, they could see something else. A chance for understanding instead of bloodshed. "I'll ride with you," he said, heading for his horse. "But Chief, give me a few minutes head start. Let me try to explain before you arrive." Red Sky nodded gravely. "Wisdom speaks through you, friend. We will follow." Samuel galloped into Copper Ridge to find the town in chaos. Sheriff Morrison was shouting orders while men scrambled to defensive positions behind overturned wagons and water troughs. Women and children huddled in the church, their faces pale with terror. "They're coming," Samuel yelled, dismounting in the middle of the street. "But not how you think." Jake Patterson emerged from behind the general store, rifle in hand. "How many, Hayes? How many savages did your kindness bring down on us?" 40 warriors, led by Chief Red Sky himself, Samuel announced, watching fear ripple through the gathered defenders. "But they're not coming to fight." Sheriff Morrison's face turned red. "Not coming to fight? That's the biggest war party seen in these parts in 10 years. They're coming to honor a debt," Samuel said urgently. "Listen to me. Running Wolf is Red Sky's nephew. When I helped him yesterday, I unknowingly saved the chief's own family. They're bringing gifts, not war." "Gifts?" Mrs. Garrett's voice cracked from the church doorway. "What kind of gifts do savages bring?" Before Samuel could answer, the sound of hoofbeats thundered from the desert. 40 mounted warriors crested the ridge overlooking town, their silhouettes stark against the morning sky. For a moment, they sat motionless as carved stone, letting the town see their strength. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "There's enough of them to kill us all." Samuel stepped into the middle of the street, directly between the town's defenders and the approaching war party. "Hold your fire," he shouted. "I'm going out to meet them." "You're not going anywhere." Patterson swung his rifle towards Samuel. "You've done enough damage?" The sharp crack of a gunshot split the air, but it wasn't Patterson who fired. Sheriff Morrison had put a warning shot over the big man's head. "Lower your weapon, Jake," Morrison commanded. "We don't shoot neighbors, no matter how misguided they might be." Samuel nodded gratefully to the sheriff, then walked slowly toward the approaching riders. Red Sky and Running Wolf rode at the front, both men's faces painted with symbols Samuel didn't understand, but somehow recognized as peaceful. The chief halted his horse 20 yards from the barricades. In the tense silence, he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "People of Copper Ridge, I am Red Sky of the Navajo Nation. We come in peace to honor a debt of life." "What debt?" Sheriff Morrison called out, though his rifle remained ready. Red Sky gestured toward Samuel. "Yesterday this man saved my nephew's life when your people would have watched him die. According to our law, such kindness creates a bond between our peoples that must be honored." Running Wolf rode forward, his arm still in a makeshift sling, but his voice strong. "I was dying beside your well when Samuel Hayes gave me water and medicine. He called me son when your people called me enemy." The young warrior's words carried across the silent street, and Samuel saw something shift in several faces. Mrs. Garrett's expression softened as she looked at Running Wolf's youth and obvious pain. "In our tradition," Red Sky continued, "life debts are paid with life. We offer alliance instead of warfare, trade instead of raids, friendship instead of fear." One by one, the 40 warriors behind him reached into their pouches and held up the gifts they'd brought. Blankets woven with intricate patterns, silver jewelry that caught the morning light, pottery painted with symbols of peace and prosperity. "These gifts," Red Sky announced, "are for the children of your town, so they may grow up knowing that kindness creates kindness, and that enemies can become friends when good men choose courage over fear." Jake Patterson lowered his rifle slightly, confusion replacing rage. "You're giving gifts to our children?" Running Wolf nodded. "Your children did not kill my people, and my people did not kill yours. Why should they inherit our hatred when they could inherit our friendship instead?" Samuel felt tears stinging his eyes as he watched the transformation taking place. Fear was giving way to wonder as townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places. Mrs. Garrett was the first to step forward, her young daughter clinging to her skirts. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why offer friendship after all the blood between our peoples?" Red Sky's weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "Because yesterday, one of your people showed my nephew that mercy is stronger than hatred. If one man can choose compassion over fear, perhaps many can." Sheriff Morrison slowly lowered his rifle. "What do you propose, Chief?" "A trading post," Red Sky replied. "Here in Copper Ridge. My people have silver, turquoise horses. Yours have tools, cloth, medicine. Together we build prosperity instead of graves." Running Wolf dismounted carefully and walked to Samuel, offering him the reins of a magnificent paint horse. "For the man who saved my life," he said. "In our tradition, such a gift makes you family." Samuel accepted the reins with shaking hands. Around him, he could see the town's fear melting away as children emerged to stare in wonder at the gifts and painted ponies. Jake Patterson was the last to lower his weapon. "This doesn't bring back my brother," he said quietly. "No," Red Sky agreed, "but it might prevent other brothers from dying. Is that not worth something?" Patterson nodded slowly, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. As the sun climbed higher over Copper Ridge, two peoples who had been enemies began the long work of becoming friends, all because one man had chosen to see humanity in a stranger's suffering. The carved wolf stone in Samuel's pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can change the world.